around it. And nutrition is obviously fundamental to your progress as an athlete, but there isn't any kind of magic secrecy to that at all.
I wish
It's
there
really
was.
about everything is about consistency, obviously. But there is something about the kind of primate human brain that lights up when it's been told that there is this thing that's hiding, behind the curtain, and I'm going to tell you what it is. That gives people a sense of agency and excitement, makes them feel special. That overrides that you know default to good judgment
Yep.
and experience. You know.
We believe what we want to believe. And it is, especially when it comes to, like you kind of pointed out, the conspiracy aspect of they're lying to you. It's the food companies and the government conspired together and they made you sick. And that's a very sexy thing for people because nobody wants to believe that their actions led to them being
Right. It
in
wasn't your responsibility.
right. And on a broader scale, when I got into grad school, it's interesting how the arc of my thinking has gone. I got to grad school very much in the camp of not completely all the way there, but close. Of if you're obese, it's because you're lazy and you're just not diligent or disciplined enough. And then the more I was just around people, when you're young, you get very black and white and you have very strong opinions and you just haven't had life kick you in the teeth enough. And I realized, one, there were things, I was very disciplined as an athlete for nutrition, for scholastics, but there was other things in my life I was very undisciplined about. And why didn't that translate? Right? And then I kind of took that back out and thought, look at all these obese people who are very successful in other aspect of their life. It can't just be laziness, right? And I think what people have a real difficult time with is, I think Will Smith said this, they try to tie like fault and responsibility together. And if it's something else's fault, someone else's fault, it should be their responsibility to fix it. And the reality is, as human beings, and you can apply this to almost anything, it may not be your fault for where you wind up, but it's going to be your responsibility to deal with the ramifications and fix it. And a great example of this is I was bullied really badly growing up, and it led me in personal relationships to be extremely defensive, which if you read anything about personal relationships, that is one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? And it really, even with friendships, made it hard for me to receive feedback from people. It felt like an attack. And so I can blame it on the fact that I was like bullied by my peers horrifically growing up, but that doesn't help anything now. I have to do the work to fix that.
Right.
And same thing with, you look at obesity, there's this kind of this trope going around that, well, the government put out the food guide pyramid and then everybody got way more sick and way more fat. And I'm like, listen, I'm not the biggest fan of the government, okay? I consider myself an independent, but I'd probably be a fiscal conservative, I would say. So I'm not the biggest fan of the government, but this idea that they wanted to make everybody sick and stuff, like the government's just made out of people like you and me,
And nobody followed the guidelines anyway.
So
There's no adherence to that. So
they
that's
pick out-
the overlooked kind of key thing.
Warriors have engaged the enemy.
You said it. They pick out the one thing, increase your intake of starches. We did do that, but it also said exercise, control your calories, don't do added sugars, added
Base
oils.
is under attack.
So we did like one thing out of 10 that the government, recommended, and then people go, oh, see, it made us sick. And I mean,
What's up, Soren?
not really. We just,
Shit, I
people
forgot to
love
check
be able
fuse
to
too.
blame
Is under attack.
2 gas.
mindset in terms of
And I lost the probe.
growth versus
Yikes,
being
bro.
stuck. It feels
Bingo's
good
always here.
in the short term
Sure.
to be able to say, wasn't my fault, it was this thing, it was that thing, I didn't
It's
have
9:30 here.
But the problem is if that's true,
And we're listening to a nutritional podcast, so you guys are going to learn something.
what can you do? Right? But if your mindset is, well, it is my responsibility, then you actually have some autonomy and freedom that you can make those changes. And the thing I'll tell people is like, hey, I'm not saying this stuff isn't hard. It is absolutely hard. And I mean, I'm sure you can attest to, as a recovering addict, like, it's very, very difficult. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are able to do it. Therefore, it can be done. And we need to empower people. I just don't
So
know
I meant
how
Marine
much the
first.
kind of like portrayal of victimhood really helps. You know what I mean? I think being empathetic to people and saying, okay,
Which is interesting.
this isn't necessarily your fault.
This
And actually,
is
when I talk about, like, the bottom lane way
probably
of coaching with our coaching team. We always say you have to have two very important things for effective coaching: empathy and accountability. They have to coexist.
Those
Because
things.
if you're just doing empathy, there's no impetus for change. If you're just doing accountability,
Forgot a
and you're like a
pylon, I
drill sergeant,
guess.
you know, people end up not being honest with you. They tune you out, right? You have to have both. You have to say, help them, understand why it happened. Or like if they, if somebody goes off the rails with their diet or something like that. Our coaches being able to say, okay, understand how that happened. Here was the antecedent to that. How can we possibly prevent that in the future? And then a lot of times if we're having difficulty with clients, we're not like browbeating them about the goals. We'll just kind of like mirror back what they said was important to them. And say, hey, these are the things that said were important. Here are the actions that have to get you in alignment with that. And so how can we use this to get
Okay.
aligned with that?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into what you shared. I want to tease out a few things.
Yeah,
First of all, this idea that you had a kind of very binary notion, at least with respect to weight loss, like, hey, listen, if you're obese, like, here are the things you do.
Maybe I didn't even need the battery, to be
about
honest.
doing them, and then growing into an appreciation of psychology that
Interesting.
the nuance that I have as somebody who
Definitely could have defended that a little better, but it's not the worst.
engine to achieve anything, and every success that I had as a young person, I could point to that as the key thing that allowed me to overcome obstacles and make my way in the world, until I was confronted with alcoholism. And all of that self-will not only failed me, but actually made the problem worse. And then I had to really let go of that and understand that this was much more complex.
But do you think that was because of like that will? I'm honestly asking for my own edification. Like, do you feel like you felt very ashamed when you weren't able to do it, and that kind of like
Oh, of course.
pushed you into it further?
Of course.
Yeah.
So my
Probably should be able to get some damage here, but
for hard work, my ability to kind of out-suffer the next person served me very well as a competitive swimmer and as a student. Like, I could study really hard. I could, overcome a talent deficit gap and like make my way forward into the world. And I was rewarded for that. And so I just thought, well, this is how I'm going to do everything. I'm just going to be the hardest worker in the room. I'm just going to apply this capacity for hard work and suffering to all of the tasks in front of me. And alcoholism was something that, I kind of privately went to war with, using that one cudgel that I had in my toolbox. And it didn't work, and it just made me more and more ashamed to make the problem worse. And it became very confusing. Well, if this is not working, like, I don't know what to do now, until it got so bad that I had to raise my hand and positive change or overcome an obstacle.
Warriors have engaged
Not
the
the
enemy.
least with weight loss or making a change in their diet. the limiting factor is generally psychological in nature. Otherwise, it would just be, here's your list of things to do, and you would go and do them, right? But that's not how we function. We're emotional beings. And as somebody who has worked with thousands of people to help them make better choices, I'm sure you've had a similar kind of analogous experience with maybe frustrating also, trying to help people who
I wonder if I could have just
help themselves.
pushed in.
Then that's where the empathy
Probably.
piece comes in, right? Because if you don't have that,
It's so funny.
Oh yeah. That's nice.
Stuff works. And
Do I always rely on hard work and suffering?
my therapist
Goddamn
basically
right.
said, how many times do
The definition
I
of
have to tell
Protoss.
you, like, where you're coming up short, and you keep trying to plow through it, and then when you can't, you're ashamed of yourself, and so then you beat
You
yourself
do
up.
310 ladder, match him 5 times, using different types of void ray cheese.
And it's interesting with regards
I think I know
to
who the guy you're talking
alcoholism,
about.
my friend John Deloney, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Is his
He
name
sounds like a
Jeremy,
great
I
guy,
think?
by the way.
Jeremy?
Um,
Jeremy SC2? No,
He said, alcohol is very good at what it does.
there's
You
this
know,
guy in, was it NA?
A proxy instead of having to deal.
There's this
with
guy
the
in NA that
problem,
always has a void ray
it numbs
all
you up,
in, like 4-gate void ray all in.
And so if you get in
I think
that
his name's
same
Jeremy.
cycle
If you look up,
where
it would be
you
a
try
he
to
might
do
play on a
something,
barcode, but
end up
if you look up in
breaking,
his SC2
and
pulse,
you're
it'll be
even
like
harder on
Jeremy or
yourself. Well,
something.
then how do you deal with that shame?
Something like
Alcohol is
that.
a good way to deal with that shame. And for some people, it's that. For some people, it's gambling. For some people, it's food. For some people, it's sex. And,
but it's all the same thing. That shame spiral with alcoholism. Yeah, you're ashamed, and then those emotions are so overwhelming that you have to drink to mute them, right? And then you're sort of exacerbating the
Is that
cycle.
better? Can you guys hear better
But
now?
That is equally applicable to food.
Yeah.
And I just know from my own personal experience, like getting sober and then being very slow to recognize the extent to which, the inner addict would grab onto food as a coping mechanism to, modulate my, emotions when they were uncomfortable. Like, well, I can't drink or use drugs, but I can certainly go to Jack in the Box, and that seems to be a good substitute and something that I did for many
It's a
years
fast
before
barracks.
I had, another awakening with that. And it's very crafty that way. And I think it's operating along a spectrum where nobody is nobody is free from it. Like, yes, you can end up with a needle in your arm in rehab, but that doesn't.
Thanks for the follow, Noam Chomsky.
Can't put their phone down, or ends up
SC2.
plowing their face into a bowl of Ben and Jerry's at midnight every night. It really is. It can be tracked down to the same thing, which is we're very uncomfortable with just sitting with our own emotions, and we're always grasping for something to take us out of the moment. And food, just like alcohol or perhaps gambling for somebody else, is very effective and reliable when it comes to that. And that makes the conundrum, like the untangling of that knot to kind of help somebody find a healthier way forward with respect to their food habits, all the trickier, because you do have to be a psychologist on some level to understand what the barriers are when it comes to people and their daily habits.
Yeah, I mean, I
Think I got him?
You just said as well.
Yep, got him.
So take alcohol, for example.
Very nice.
Here's why the eating stuff, in some ways, is
Who's talking
not that
now?
it's hard.
I don't know.
It's
This
just
is Lane
it's
Norton.
hard.
Who's like
You
a,
have to do it every day.
Imagine you're an alcoholic, and I said, well,
I don't
you
know. I
still
follow
gotta
one
do
of
it
his
for
workout
drinks,
programs. He's
right?
like a workout
You can
dude.
abstain, right?
So I don't know why they're
Drug
talking about,
addicts
like,
abstain. I mean, not that it's not
You
hard,
know,
it's hard,
whatever this is.
but knowing that
Isn't really
you have
quite his expertise, but
that's a whole nother level of hard to be able to moderate that. And it's not just one of the reasons that alcohol is tough to quit is that it is so tied up in our culture. Well, food is way more tied up in our culture. Food is not just food, it's how we connect. I mean, think about the last time we went to an event or got together with family and there wasn't food as part of it. Like it is part of how we connect with other human beings. And trying to untangle that and teach people how to moderate themselves, that's really difficult. And some people say, well, I just, I quit eating these certain foods. And for some people that can work. But for a lot of people, that leads down an even more difficult road,
Missed a pile
which
on.
is kind of like the reactive response of you're trying to avoid certain foods, and then when
didn't
you get
really
exposed
quite
to them,
miss a
you
pile.
actually end up eating way more of them.
Overeating them,
Right,
overindulging, because they're taboo or what.
Right, and I always tell people, it sounds silly, but mindset matters when you're doing this stuff. And I always tell people, have guidelines, not rules. So, for example, a guideline would be, I'm going to try and limit my sugar intake because sugar isn't satiating, and I don't feel as good when I eat a lot of sugar. And it's part of somebody doing hyperpalatable, calorie-dense food or easy to overeat. Versus, I do not eat sugar ever, period, because it's toxic, and I'm gonna spike my insulin. Well, one person, let's say they end up, deciding, well, first of all, the person with the rule, what about fruit now, right? Because the sugar in fruit, biochemically really isn't different than the sugar that you get elsewhere. Like, it all breaks down into glucose and fructose, So that's one problem. So you end up doing weird things that aren't necessarily healthful because you have these hard rules. Same thing with, like, say, even like processed foods, not eating any processed food. Okay, as a guideline, probably a good guideline, because processed food tends to be more hyperpalatable and more energy dense, easy to overeat. But, like, how do you define processed?
Where do you draw the line with that?
Where do you draw the line, right? Like, I mean, there's some, like, various protein powders have been shown to be, beneficial for, certain things. And even, like, you take, like a whey protein, for example, there's actually some evidence that it has some antioxidant.
Thought I built a forge already, but I didn't.
Like whey protein concentrate. But again, if you're saying, well, I'm not eating processed foods, well, now you can't touch this stuff, right?
It's a moving target, right? Is olive oil a processed food? Is hummus a processed food? Like, if you're acculturating a food, you're processing it. I guess we can all agree what's an ultra-processed food, all the terrible stuff, but then it becomes a murky area. But I guess the point that you're getting at really is when you have these hard and fast rules, and because human animals are imperfect by nature, there will probably come a point where you transgress that rule, and then you have those feelings of guilt and shame, which isn't really in service to you, right? And having a kind of looser relationship that allows for some flexibility in the long term is healthier. And I think that's right and correct, but also I'm somebody who operates well within binaries, and I think, if I'm being really honest, like, my initial foray into the world of being plant-based was catalyzed initially because it's binary, and because I had this positive experience of getting sober in the construct of 12-step that is also very binary. You're either drinking, you're using drugs, or you're not. Like, there is no gray area. And when I was trying to tackle how to improve my eating habits, plant-based was a factor. It's like, I just don't know. My brain focuses on that. That removes decision fatigue. It's been a year, so I've had a whole evolution with this and my perspective, and I still love it and all of that, but my reasons are different and my relationship with it is different. But that binary thing, I think, was helpful to me at that time. And so I don't want to be dismissive of those kind of rules, because I think they're entry points for a certain personality type.
That's probably very true as well. And that's why I am very careful, like, to very rarely say always, never, best, worst, because there's variations to everything. And some people are outliers too, right? Like, when you're looking at studies, they're reporting means, averages, but you're not a mean, I'm not a mean. We're individual data points, right? But we can start with, okay, for like, you know, again, with, like when I coach people, well, I know what tends to work best based on research and data, and I'll start there with somebody, but then paying attention to how they are, sometimes it needs to be a little bit more extreme, right? But I think the hope is eventually your understanding evolves so that it's not so binary, right? So that if, let's say, one day you kind of strayed because you didn't have something like, right? You're not beating yourself up over it. You're not shamed about it. You know, take the kind of ethical animal considerations out of it, right? Just from the health perspective. The inner conversation is different, right? And even, you know, I had a friend the other night who they were a recovered alcoholic, and they had to have a glass of wine, and they said, you know, and I'm not saying this is right for everybody, right? But, but she said, you know, for me, being able to have half a glass of wine with friends, in the mindset of I'm not trying to numb up my feelings, I'm not trying to avoid anything. It's just a part of my life, and then being able to walk away from it, that was a huge victory for me, you know? And again, some people, the chemical that starts the whole right. But I think the point I guess that I'm making is, at least for her, it didn't start that shame spiral, right? Because of the mindset.
Need more obs. I always forget to build obs.
We actually see, and I'm probably going to butcher the study a little bit, so I apologize in advance for people watching. I'm going to try and get the crux of it correct. They noticed, this is like way back in the 90s, what was called a disinhibition reflex. Kind of, sort of like binge eating, right? When people they had two different models of dieting. Flexible model, flexible mindset, restrictive mindset. Restrictive was, you know, I can't have these things. Flexible was, I can have kind of whatever was part of a healthy diet. And they found that when they exposed both groups to like hyperpalatable food, I can't remember exactly what they used. I love it. Basically saying you have to eat at least one. You don't have to eat more than one, but you have to eat at least one. They found that the group that was restrictive ended up eating significantly more than the group that was flexible, right? And I think again that kind of points to the mindset of like going to, like if somebody says they avoid sugar because it's toxic. Well, what happens if you're eating something and you don't realize, oh, it's actually got some sugar in it? You look at the package, whatever. Well, in your mind, well, I've already screwed up.
Right.
Might as well just...
So the snowball starts rolling down the hill, and then all the good habits go out the window because I failed and I couldn't do it, so fuck it.
Exactly. I'm glad we can curse. I call that fuck it mode. Yeah. And I started working with a guy. I don't work with many people one-on-one anymore, but I did take on one client last year, and he was a very stressful lifestyle hedge fund manager. He was having issues with like binge eating pretty much every day, and you know, because he would go into it like, I am never doing this again. And I said, hey, why don't we shift that instead of I'm never doing this again to let's just try to have it less frequently. Let's just try to be a little bit less frequent, right?
Or the tried and true 12-step way, which is like, I'm just not going to do it today.
Yeah, great. Or, you know, and one of the things I said was like, hey, you know, if you find yourself, it was always at night, right? Always because stressful day. I always say like nobody ends up screwing up their diet at 10 a.m. after they had 8 hours of sleep and they're low stress, right? Like that's not what happens. And so I said, you know, let's start putting a little bit of things to keep your mind engaged, because again, trying to numb up or trying to turn off the mind. Put a post-it on that cabinet that you tend to get into, and just not anything nasty, but just say, am I hungry or am I just stressed? And then like sometimes you get up in the middle of the night, go out to the kitchen. I said, just lock your bedroom door from the inside. I know it doesn't stop you, but you still have to consciously unlock that door to get out. And you're just putting these little kind of reminders about just to get you mindful. And I don't think we do that. thing you can't buy. You have to wait 1 day.
Yeah, the delayed effect, like,
Right.
because that makes you more mindful and present with the emotions that are motivating the choice to begin with because they're uncomfortable. And if you can develop the resilience or the capacity to sit with those uncomfortable emotions and gain experience with how they're fleeting and they pass, that allows you to, over time, make fewer and fewer of those impulsive bad decisions.
Yeah.
But that's like very not sexy.
No,
Wade.
it's not.
You know,
it's not.
let's talk about lectins. I want to point the finger at like aspartame or whatever it is, you know, that makes me feel like it's somebody else's fault and I don't have to take responsibility for this. What do you think is the key distinguishing factor between the person who's able to, you know, take the advice and make the positive change and sustain that change over time versus the person who struggles, who just can't quite get there?
I think there's quite a few things, but I think having some trust in the process. And what I mean by that is, as an athlete, for example, to do the stuff that I do, like I read about some of your accomplishments. Crazy. I'm on the other end of it, right? Like I lift heavy things in a straight line for 1 rep. But I set
we're on the far ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, I set a world squat record back in 2015. I hit 668 pounds at the 205-pound weight class, drug-free. It's been broken a bunch of times since then. But like for me to get there, one of the things that you're acutely aware of is that you may put in all the work and you may still not get what you want. Like, you have to be willing to not count that cost. I think a lot of people really struggle with being willing to put in the work without a guarantee of the outcome. But here's the rub. If you don't do the work, you're definitely not going to get it. And one of the things I'll tell people is, you may put in all the work, and maybe you don't get exactly what you want, but you're probably lucky. You're going to learn a lot, and you're probably going to way better off than you would. Now, when it comes to like losing weight, obviously I think it's pretty tangible thing because you choose less calories than you expend. You will lose weight. But kind of telling somebody that, I mean, it's like telling somebody, well, if you want to save money, just earn more than you spend. We all know that. I don't think that's like news to anybody.
What's up, Evan?
Right? But like, that doesn't change people's lives. And
Boomer ship wins again.
Plenty of them end up broke, right? So obviously, there are some behavioral habit sort of things that need to be modified. And as you said, it's very unsexy to talk about.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in a while either.
You know that lectins, that's the thing, or sugar is addictive, not being able to lose weight, or anything out that people kind of want to demonize. And there's a few things. One,
I love oof.
paralysis
He used
by
to stream
analysis
quite a bit too.
And perfectionism has killed more dreams than failure ever could. And I think so many people, especially with that fire hose of information that's out there.
Looks like he started back from 4-month break.
Where do I start? Like I don't know where to start. Like low carb. No, wait, plant-based. Intermittent fasting. Well, hang on. What about this thing? And but I also need to, have fun and live my life. And like these competing sort of messages, right? How do you synthesize all that into a plan that's useful? And I think.
Yeah, not I love oof. Dude, that'd be crazy.
What I mean by that, like,
I love oof.
Instead of speaking abstractly, I'll just be blunt. If you want to lose weight, for example, and I know that's not everybody's goal out there, but we do have a high amount of people out there who are suffering with obesity. And so if you want to lose weight, you have to eat less calories than you expend. And we can.
How dare you?
I know. Well, and again, I always tell people, people insert judgment on that isn't there, right? So what I'll say that. And what
Guys, you have to eat less calories than you consume
Lane,
to
not
lose
all
weight.
calories are equal.
Just think about that for a second.
Let's talk about that real quick because I think it is important to cover.
Is this guy shaming my rolls?
Because calorie is just a unit of measurement.
Right.
You're talking about
Like a volt or a watt or an inch
it's
or a
exactly
yard.
right. It's like saying, well, that.
Should I put a
thing that
trigger
exists.
warning on my stream or something?
Now, all sources of calories do not have the same effect on energy.
Thanks for the
expenditure
follow.
And intake. And what I mean
I'm
by
gonna go
that
eat a
is,
bowl of ice
we
cream.
know, for
You can,
example,
and you
that
can still lose
high-fiber
weight
diets,
as
have
long
a
as the
greater
total
physical
calorie
effect
count
on
for
food
the
because
day
they
is less than
metabolize
what you
more
expect.
energy and fiber,
Eat
and
less,
they tend
grind
to be
more.
satiating. So
Profit.
you're getting a little bit more energy expenditure, and you're feeling more satisfied, right? And we know, with regards to protein, some of the same things. That a higher protein diet tends to be a little bit more satisfying and tends to increase energy expenditure a little bit more. So all sources aren't necessarily the same, but at the end of the day, if you lost weight over time, you did because
If I jump from now
gained
until
weight over
midnight,
time,
I might bring
you
you.
did so 'cause you were
That's
eating
about
more than
right.
you were spending. Now, some people will say, well, I don't eat that much and I gain weight. Okay, you probably don't feel like you're eating that much, but it is so easy to overeat. If you're not mindful, and especially if you've never had the experience of like weighing out portion sizes. I'll give an example of this. There was a classic study back in the early 90s. They took people who self-reported had trouble losing weight on low calories. And most of them, the average reporting was that they were eating 1,200 calories a day. And the researchers tracked them. Very controlled.
It's actually very hard to track how many calories you're actually eating.
Reporting their calories by almost 50%, actually over 50%.
Because like even on the
the
box, if it tells you that you're eating a certain calorie count, it can be wrong by like 15 or 20%.
You're saying I'm a liar.
So like
saying I'm not eating that much. No,
it's incredibly difficult.
Really poor estimators of food intake.
Just kind of have to guesstimate really hard.
We tend to see ourselves through rose-colored glasses as well. I mean, people underreport their debt.
And also, nutrition labels aren't necessarily entirely accurate, even for the most earnest person who's trying to do it right.
Right.
Like exactly what that guy just said.
If you ever want to be depressed, go weigh out a serving of peanut butter, or a serving of ice cream or cereal. Like, I remember the first time I actually weighed out a serving of cereal, and I was like, that barely covers the bottom of the bowl,
Right. Or an average, salad dressing.
Right.
Things like that are hypercaloric that you would, unless you're really paying attention, you could very easily overindulge and not be any the wiser.
Exactly. So that is a big part of it. And again, people kind of put judgment on that. Try to take the judgment away. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why it's very unsexy to talk about that sort of thing, because you're aware of the inherent personal responsibility, right? And I always tell people, hey, you might have eaten what you thought was a calorie deficit, or maybe you didn't think you were eating that much, and maybe you still felt hungry. All I'm saying is if you gained mass over time, it's because for your given level of energy expenditure per day, you were eating too much for that given level of energy. But that can be different amongst different people. I mean, a lot of people like me, I go in the gym, I train for 2-3 hours a day. I can eat 3,400 calories and maintain my body weight. So it's not that hard for me, right? Because that's a pretty healthy level of intake. But if you're somebody who has a sedentary job, you don't exercise that much, and you don't have a ton of lean body mass, your energy expenditure is probably going to be pretty low.
Then there are people who have hormonal dysregulation or some kind of thyroid problem or have a different BMR, like base metabolic rate. There are other complications there. I don't want to go down too deep of a rabbit hole on that, but to your point of things not being, ostensibly binary, there are other complications that make it more challenging than it is for other people to.
Yeah, what's actually really interesting about people who are obese prone versus what we call obese resistant. Think about everybody's got a friend like, man, they can eat like crazy and they don't gain weight, right? whereas somebody says, man, I feel like I look at food and I pack it on. So 2 things with that. One, people who can be more obese resistant have better appetite regulation, and they may eat a lot in a meal when you see them, but they don't really snack. Like most people with good appetite regulation are not big snackers. And that's actually one of the things that pops up consistently among people who lose weight and keep it off is they don't limit their snacking.
And what drives appetite regulation?
Oh, a lot of stuff.
Is that like a 4-hour podcast
man,
deep
I
dive
took
just to
a
understand that?
full semester on appetite regulation in graduate school, and I walked out going, this is like a symphony with, this hormone matters, but only when this one is present, and the half-life, it's like, it is very complicated. I mean, there are some generalizations we can make. But the really interesting part is what also tends to happen with obese resistant people is when they eat more, they tend to spontaneously move more without realizing it. So you've heard of NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis?
Yeah.
So a lot of times you'll hear like, people with obesity have lower levels of physical activity and invariably say, no, I go to the gym an hour a day. That may be true, but physical activity isn't just about what you do at the gym. There are spontaneous movement, like just what I'm doing here with my hands and fidgeting. People who are obese resistant, it can be quite a bit of difference in the literature in terms of how much they will spontaneously move and dissipate extra energy through meat. So there's a classic study, I think from Levine in the 90s, where they overfed people, I want to say, I could butcher it, but I want to say about 1,000 calories a day above their maintenance. And on average, I think over the course of the study, people gained, I think the average gain was around 5 kilograms, something like that. But there was one person who gained like 8 kilograms, and one person who gained 0.8 kilograms. And what they found was the person who gained 0.8 kilograms basically
He could be going
spontaneously became so much more active without even
Muta. I'm not
more,
Muta.
they got
He could be
on
faking the
ground
Muta and be
more,
going
they were fidgeting more
Unconsciously, though.
Hydra.
unconsciously. And that's the thing. It's not something that's super modifiable. It's not really modifiable at all.
So
if
I'm
you
gonna get a
start
rover
something that
there.
kind of falls into that category, you may actually have to do more purposeful.
Because I
activity
scouted the Spire, so I know he likes to like cancel things
because if you're more
and
obese
go other
prone,
things. He's a little
you
tricky
may
that
not
way.
have that spontaneous nature to become more physically active. And one of the things that exercise does, because I'm sure you've heard like kind of the war about is exercise helping for weight loss or not.
Yeah.
Some people say no, some people say yes. This really boils down to like
Yep.
how do
All
you
right.
do the experiment.
The whole idea that exercise is not a pathway to weight loss is very confusing to me. That somebody
Pretty much.
who is highly credentialed could make that statement.
I'll give you the devil's
Powers
advocate
watching
argument.
response don't count.
There's a couple devil's advocate
Doesn't
arguments.
count as part of your need.
The first is, well, people exercise and they get hungry, so they just end up eating more. And some people eat past when they exercise.
I'll go Colossus, I guess.
And then the other argument is kind of this, what we call the constrained energy expenditure model, which basically the model says that majority of people have kind of a level of energy expenditure that they do throughout the day. And if they try to exercise more, what happens is they just get less spontaneously active, right? And so the overall energy expenditure doesn't change that much. So that's, there is some applicability to both of those, but so when I say that, there's some compensation on both ends of that. But it's not a complete compensation. What I mean by that is, on average, again, some people, there probably are some individuals out there who they exercise, they get hungry, they end up overeating. But, yes, if you exercise, like let's say you burn 100 calories from exercise, you tend to compensate.
F2ing hard right
That's
now.
about, at least based on Herman Pontzer's work, it's about a 28 calorie kind of compensation. Meaning, you may have burned 100 calories from exercise, what you end up netting out is about 72, right? And then, but if you look at the studies on exercise, some people eat a little bit more, but you don't eat a
Disabled F2.
to compensate what they,
Bad move.
what they exercised out. And
I need Immortals now.
exercise, actually, I think the biggest reason you see it being very
Thanks for the follow, Jay, etc. bro.
of people who lose weight to keep it off for years over 70% exercise regularly. I don't think it's necessarily from the fact that, yes, you're burning more calories, but exercise has an effect on appetite regulation as well. So it tends to sensitize you to satiety signals. And again, there's a really classic study in the 1950s in Bengali workers
God damn it.
where they looked
Kill my
at
gateways, bro.
sedentary workers, lightly active, moderately active, and like basically heart rate, right? And they found that from lightly active to heavily active, they pretty much perfectly compensated. Like the people who were doing more work just ate more, and they all were kind of maintaining their body weight. The sedentary people ate more than the lightly active, and I think more than the moderately. So sedentary actually when you're sedentary, dysregulates your appetite.
Forgot +2 air weapons.
So
That's
now
pretty bad.
Think about what has happened to society over the last 60 years. People becoming more sedentary at the computer all day, right? And you have a fire hose of cheap, readily available, hydropower energy. And even if you back up 40, 50 years, we had cases of we had to walk down to the bakery and get it,
GG.
or you had to make it yourself.
The portion sizes were different.
Dude,
too.
I have food on my
different.
Big gulps.
And even
everything
shirt.
was supersized.
And if you look at, actually, my PhD advisor talked about this. If you look at plates from like the 1800s, they were like this big, you know. And I was like now you go to the buffet, and and that's part of it too. When you go out to a restaurant, you know, if you're even me as a nutrition expert, I went to my first like Michelin star restaurant. I got done.
What's
like,
up,
you know, there
Rocker?
wasn't really that much food for how much I paid, you know. And then I'm like,
My daughter's
hey,
here.
dummy,
I'm
you
talking
weren't
to her.
paying for the portion size, you know. But that's kind of how we've been wired, right? Is, well, I want to pay a lot, I want to get a lot. And you know, and even some of the damaging messaging that we didn't realize from parents and grandparents, that you make sure you clean your plate. There's starving kids in Africa. And you know, one of the things I'm careful with my kids is when they say they're full, I'm like, okay, fine.
Right.
Great job listening to your hunger signals. You
Right.
know?
And not encouraging the overindulgence.
Yeah.
Right. And now my daughter is a little negotiator, you know, so she'll be like, I'm full. Can I have ice cream?
There's a
like,
crafty workaround.
hang on, this math doesn't math. You
But
know?
that's a window into like the human psyche and how creative it can be to like get what it wants to meet its needs. I think that also different types of exercises, from my own experience, have different impacts on appetite regulation. For example, endurance exercise, which is mostly what I do, like a long run, is actually an appetite suppressant. Like I'm not hungry for many hours after, you know, a pretty extensive like distance run. Swimming, totally different, makes me absolutely voracious afterwards.
There's scientific data on that.
Strength training, a little bit different. So, and I've just noticed this like made mental notes over the years. But when I'm doing a lot of endurance training, I actually run the risk of under eating. But if all I'm doing is swimming, like putting in massive yardage, like I will just eat everything in sight. So there's thermoregulation that applies to that I know is a key factor.
Yeah, so if you look at the research on like cold water swimming, they do see like quite a bit of increased appetite and food consumption. It's pretty interesting. But what you're saying about like endurance exercise, resistance training, yeah, people who, if they have free living people in general, I don't want to say every study, but most of the studies, if they have an exercise,
Yeah, I as well.
they don't really
when I
start
run,
eating more.
just not hungry.
You know, on
At all.
average. Now there are some
I
people
very
who start
rarely
exercising,
do any
right? They go,
exercise
well,
other
now
than
I've earned this,
strength
and I
training,
can go have this, and
Not
you
gonna
know,
pretend like I do a lot.
again, that's that's kind of around that mindset. But at least in terms of pure physiology, exercise seems to be very positive in terms of appetite regulation and improves your sensitivity to satiety signals.
So we went
And that's actually
Marine
why I think
first
the most
again.
benefit is. And then again,
Over
like,
no cardio.
you know,
True.
it's so funny how people will kind of
7
pick and
minutes a
choose
day
their
I've been doing
information
for
to
the last
support
like 2
whatever
weeks.
bias they have,
Actually,
right? So
it's not bad.
on the very extreme end of
First
this,
time
you
I've
have
really
kind
done it
of
in my
the
life, like
the
consistently. For
I don't
more
want to say
than,
health
like,
at
a
every
day or two.
size because not every health at every size
Kinda like
person has this position, but kind of the very like extreme end of
Weight
that
up,
camp,
pull
which
weight
is
down.
obesity has no negative health consequences.
Boomer
The health
strong.
consequences are from psychological stress because people fat shame them and those sorts of things.
Okay. Take it the
You know,
same pill as
they'll
last
look
game.
at and they'll make this argument. Well, you can't. Diet actually doesn't work, and exercise doesn't work because if you look at the studies over the long term, people regain the weight, which means that your body fights you and puts it back. People regain the weight because they stop doing it. Like the research is very clear about that with adherence. But again, you can pick and choose, cherry pick the lines of evidence that you want to use to construct this argument, and then if somebody is prone to want to believe that, then they found their.
I
And
get a
that
lot
goes
of
for low
proof there,
carb,
sure.
fasting, whatever have you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of studies out there that can be handpicked to support whatever preset idea you already have. Whether that's a charitable interpretation of that study is a different matter, which you're very good at disabusing people of. But there's a lot out there, and that is part of the reason why the landscape is so confusing and why the social media
gotta
landscape
scout
has
and see
become
what
this
he's doing in the
hellscape
follow-up.
of misinformation.
Research
Well,
complete.
and you
Kind of
know,
regretting building these
people, I'll
gases.
get
I
this
wish I would have gone
They
third base
cited
first.
studies
If I would have known he had
Did
that
you go
CC
look
timing.
at the study? Did you see if it actually said what they said it said? I can tell you, like when we put up articles on our site, we have right there. You can click the link, go straight to the study. Less than 1% of people click a single citation, and I understand, right? Like people are busy, and even if you click the study and go read it, most people don't have the wherewithal to disseminate that scientific jargon. It's one of the reasons I started my research review, so I could like try to kind of translate this stuff, right? But it's just really hard for the average person to pick through all this. But you've got to be really.
The average person shouldn't have to go to PubMed or go to Nature and read these studies.
And I think one of the things I tell people is this gets in. You kind of have to find people to trust to be your filter. And the hard part is people don't know how to determine who is being intellectually honest.
Right. Like, how do we discern the good from the bad actors? And my sense is there aren't very many people like you, because most people who are super into the research are not
And on
public
social media.
communicators. It's not really what they want to do. It's not what they're trained to do. Like, they're in there doing the hard. They're not on Twitter getting into fights with people or arguing about what a study said or did not say.
Right.
On some level, I feel like science communication should be part of the science education curriculum, because I think we do need more effective science communicators who really understand these things and know how to translate it in a way that that really connects with the average person. Same with journalists who report on all of these things. There's plenty of laziness there, and not great stuff on that front. But somebody who can be, kind of an antenna to help point people in the right direction, and who is, a trusted, objective source of information. Like, we need that. Like, we need to have people that we can trust. Otherwise, it's like you said, it's an analysis paralysis situation, because all these people are shouting at each other. Nobody agrees on anything. So I'm just going to continue to enjoy my big gulp and my, jelly beans while I sit at work all day.
And there's the danger. I don't know what to do, so why do anything, right? And when it comes to looking for people who to trust, basically my takeaway is, hey, just keep in mind, it can never be easy. And don't do it even with me, okay? Because I am a human like anybody else. I get stuff wrong sometimes. I have my own personal biases. I try to be honest about those. I try to disclose those whenever we're touching on something that's a personal bias. a great example is that I don't know if you heard the recent study where they gave 100 grams of protein and like they basically found that maybe the
Upgrade complete.
limit for protein anabolism is higher than what we thought it was previously. This kind of went against the personal bias I had because some of my research was looking at protein distribution, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with it. But basically, when I started the video, I was like, hey, listen, I'm going to be honest about this. Here was my belief that I had previously, and this study is going to probably shift me a little bit, okay? But that's like, I think that's an example of like trying to be intellectually honest.
And
right?
also credibility is built on instances in which you could admit that, like, hey, I thought it was this way. Now I have new evidence and I've changed my mind. I think people are very afraid of admitting when that occurs, or just being honest about the fact that science isn't something that's locked in stone, and it's about predictions and approximations, and it's a moving target, and it's always evolving. And the more you can kind of appreciate that and welcome a correcting of the record and admit when you've changed your mind, ultimately in the long run, that engenders more and more trust. It's when people dig in and refuse to look at new evidence or change their mind because they're so entrenched in whatever ideology they subscribe to, that's where the erosion of trust occurs. They think that they're trying to hold on to that trust, but ultimately it's at cross purposes with what they're trying to do, which is have that trustworthy relationship with an audience.
And I think a lot of people just don't understand like the concept of risk, right? Because you touched on it, which is, and this kind of gets into why science, trust in science overall is so far down post-pandemic. People don't understand the concept of risk. So let's just take something simple, right? Seatbelts. We know seatbelt reduces your risk of being in a fatal car accident. Like, well, not being in a car accident, dying in a car accident. Airbag, same thing. But there are some people who are killed by seatbelts. There are some people who get trapped in cars. Airbags have broken people's necks. But if you're playing the odds, you're wearing your seatbelt and you're having an airbag in your car, right? If you're playing the odds. But again, instances of exceptions to this, people kind of go, see, it's BS. And it's like, no, you just don't understand the concept of risk. Yeah, this is the equivalent of an aberration of lightning striking, right? Same token, I can find people who smoked every day and lived a long life, never got lung cancer or heart disease, right? But that's, if you're drawing it up on paper, that is not how you would do it if you want the maximum risk reduction. And I think, getting back to what I was saying about not turning your brain off, a lot of people will, first off, get focused on credentials. And I'm not saying credentials don't matter at all. I think they matter. If somebody is a PhD in a specific field and they're talking about that field, they're going to get a lot more leeway from me than somebody who isn't, right? If somebody who's and they're talking about something with health, I'm still going to give them a little bit more leeway than I would the average person because they've had to go through extensive schooling to get there. All the way down to like personal training. Like not as extensive of schooling, but still they had to learn some stuff and not to learn a little bit more than the average person. Right? But you can never turn your brain off, because I have heard it's always funny because people are like, well, this person's from Harvard, and I'm like, listen, great school, a lot of really, really smart people came out of there. I have heard some insane statements from people who came from Harvard, okay? You can't turn your brain off. And a great example, have you ever heard of
Yes.
So, if you go down the list of Nobel Prize winners, objective accounts of some of the smartest human beings that ever walked the planet, almost half of them believed in some sort of absolute nonsense. Healing crystals, eugenics,
Upgrade complete.
and some other area of science.
Upgrade complete.
And so I think sometimes people see DR in front of a name or PhD and they go, oh, just turn the brain off because, and it's like,
Right.
no, that people, I really want to emphasize this. Smart people are even more prone to cognitive dissonance than most people because they will use their own intelligence to justify, well, I wouldn't believe this. Of course you would. You're a human being.
Well, there's a couple things at play. The first is with that kind of Nobel syndrome is this idea that they had some breakthrough, right? Because they had an originality of mind to approach a problem from a perspective that nobody else could see before. And they are rewarded for that. So of course that person is going to think, well, I'm going to now apply that in all these other areas of life because I have this unique skill set. And they're going to over-index on their capacity to problem solve in areas of life. We want people to appreciate and value that, but it does become problematic beyond their areas of domain expertise. I mean, Lane, like technically I'm a doctor. I have a Juris Doctor. I would argue that that's not really a doctor at all.
Just put DR in front of your name and
just
say whatever you want.
I'm just going to start doing that on the internet and see what happens.
Under attack.
And I think in internet speak, that would be referred to as galaxy search, right? People who have some kind of domain expertise in a certain area, and then they go on podcasts and start talking all kinds of crazy about stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with their education, professional career, any area of expertise. And that's where we see all this kind of culture war stuff, like, oh, you're a physicist, so now you're going to talk about trans rights. Like, there's just so much of that right now that's happening. And we have this human default to authority when it comes to people that we think are smart, and we tend to give them a lot more run as we should in areas.
And nutrition is an easy one because there's a very low barrier to entry. Anyone can call themselves a nutrition coach. There's literally no barrier to entry, right? And so, and it at all, So, what I tell people say, well, I can't trust somebody's credentials. Even somebody with a specific focus, because people are humans and biased. By the way, if you say they don't have bias, you usually have more bias. I would never say I don't have bias. Absolutely not. I think that's the argument. You want to listen to the way people talk as much, if not even more, than what they actually say. What I mean by that is real experts will very rarely say things like always, never, best, worst. They don't really use those kind of superlatives because, as you mentioned, everything is kind of on a spectrum of a risk analysis, right? And one of my favorite quotations is, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And I think a lot of people would do well to remember that when they're discussing some of these things, because this idea that there's just one panacea diet. I mean, overall, we kind of have an idea of a healthy eating pattern, whether it's plant-based, Mediterranean. We know it's higher fiber, fruits and vegetables, lean protein sources, those sorts of things, right? And obviously, that comes with controlling calories, limiting processed food because it's energy dense. But the idea that there's one diet that's going to be the absolute best for heart disease and cancer and building muscle and metabolic health and, neurodegenerative disorders. I mean, I think that health all of those things. But I'll give you an example of, I was reading a paper the other day where I had to read it again because I was like, that can't be right. Parkinson's disease. You know what one of the biggest lifestyle risk reduction factors you can do for Parkinson's disease is? Smoke. It lowers your risk of Parkinson's. It's very consistent in the literature.
Wow.
Alcohol consumption.
Somebody did say that to me at some point. I think I have heard that.
And alcohol consumption is right? So again, now it's hard to tease out with all the confounding variables of epidemiology if that's actually a cause and effect thing. But with smoking, it was a pretty powerful kind of risk reduction. So the point of all that is just to be careful of anybody who their diet is the panacea for everything, or whatever they're kind of selling or pushing. Because one of the things I get from people is they go, well, you gotta, it's all about the funding source, or is this person selling something, or, and it's funny, I got somebody on Twitter was like, well, we can't trust you, you're selling ass. And I'm like, okay, but I never said this was the solution to everything. I just said, hey, this is something I made, and based on evidence-based principles, and here's the reasons I think it's a useful tool. Right?
Yeah, it's a lazy barb to throw at someone to say you're a grifter because you're trying to make a living.
Right.
It's like, of course, there's a spectrum of integrity when it comes to this sort of thing, but it's sort of
well, and the same thing goes with funding sources of studies. I always tell people if your only criticism of a study is the funding source, it says more about your bias than the researchers. Now, it should be disclosed. It is a portion of it. But it's funny how funding sources only get brought up when it's a study that somebody doesn't like. Whereas, I don't know if you saw the study that just came out of, what is the name of the chemical? Chloromafos, I want to say. And they found it in cereals. It's a pesticide, and there was a study where they showed this present in urine of people who consume these cereals, whatever. Well, it was funded by a group that is a organic food lobby group, right? Now, people say, well, people are eating less processed foods. It's always a good thing. Okay, but again, everybody's freaking out about funding sources. Nobody talks about this one.
You can't have it.
Right. You have to be consistent with it, right? And this is, so the small story short in that study, the amount that they found in people's urine was still only a magnitude below what an unsafe amount of this stuff is exactly causing. Now, that being said, this is one of the things I point out a lot with, there was a very well-known carnivore diet advocate who has a video saying epidemiology is garbage. And as soon as an epidemiology study comes out that supports his bias, that thing is plastered up there as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I just said, hey, this is logically inconsistent, right? If epidemiology is garbage, it means that the epidemiology you also like is garbage, right?
It's a pick and choose, type of adventure.
Right.
What serves me, I'll use it.
Right. And so when I say listen to how people talk, real experts will typically, like earlier, I made the devil's advocate argument, right, about why exercise isn't good for weight loss. So I gave you that argument, but then I explained why I'm on this side of it, right? Like actual experts will do that. They'll also, a lot of times you ask them a question, they'll ask you a question back. Or like, if I wanted to get ready for it, right? And I come to you and I go, hey, what about you?
Yeah, the answer is well, followed by a bunch of questions to narrow down how to specifically answer it in this context for this person at this particular moment in time. For whom, when, why, all of that.
And so I think that is what we look for. And unfortunately, it's very counterintuitive. What you're looking for is somebody who doesn't sound super certain, right? We're using words like likely, maybe, possibly. The internet is on track as well. They want the convicted person to light the camera and say, forget about all that. Here's what you need to do. Here's why it's the best. And they're very superlative, certain, and charismatic. Right, and that's one of the things that I've actually found better at is not if you can't beat them, join them. But I'm like, all right, so one of the problems with science communication is we aren't reaching people, right? We're not connecting with people. And it's funny because people will be like, man, you, like this last year, you blew up.
Upgrade complete.
I'm like, not really. I've been doing this for like 20 years, you know? Now you just found out about me because other people found out about me
Upgrade
because I
complete.
was on some podcast that they heard that they were, right? But what happened, or what I focused on was, how do I deliver this? How can I make this palatable for people? Can I come up with really good analogies that still keep the
GG.
nuance of what I'm saying,
Thanks for the
while
follows.
making it palatable enough for people to understand and make it click, right? And that's where I was like, okay,
We're
if
unbeatable.
ethically I have
I
kind of
wouldn't
my
say that.
hard boundary of where I'm going to go, but I am going to, you know, push up to like a little bit of clickbaitiness
Can you go back
to
to
try to get
performance?
more eyeballs, because if they're not looking
do you
at
mean?
my
Oh,
stuff,
this
they're going to
rating?
go look at somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm never going to go with something that I think is disingenuous, right? But I'm going to try and make it
Problem.
entertaining. I'm going to try and make it fun.
What's up, Edge J?
I might be a little snarky sometimes, but like I tried for years to be highbrow, straight down the line science,
Yeah.
and it was like shouting into a void, you know? It was like shouting into a void.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful I had a really great PhD advisor. I'll never forget this. When I was giving my exit seminar, my mom came to my exit seminar. So my mom's there. There's also high-level professors who are there. And I said to Dr. Lehman, I was like, well, who do I like, how do I give this? And he goes, your mom should learn something and I should learn something.
Mm.
And that is the hardest to write for, right? That's the hardest to present for. And that really stuck with me, you know, which was basically, how can you walk this line of generalizing enough that people can understand it, but not generalizing so much that it loses the core of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very fine line to walk, I think.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, I think you do a really good job with that. The other piece to that is not condescending to the audience, like providing them with scientific information that might be challenging for some people to truly understand, but with this kind of belief, like, you can get this, like, if you pay attention to what I'm saying, even if this is new for you, like, I believe in your ability to kind of learn what I'm trying to say to you. And I think people like that because they feel respected.
Yeah, and I've quite honestly struggled with that at times, right? Because I think I'll every once in a while, like not every once in a while, I'll go into my comments and I'll be like, oh my gosh, guys, whew, you know, like, how is that your takeaway, right? And if hopefully I'm going to grow and get better with understanding that, you know, if I'm going against your belief system, this is going to feel very threatening, you know? This is going to feel very challenging. And I have had a lot of people who have actually messaged me and said, man, I used to hate you. And, you know, you really just won me over the years with the information that you provided. You know,
Wore them down.
Just wore them down, yeah. Just I'll outlast anybody, right? And, but I think, you know, you mentioned earlier about, like, kind of every once in a while having times of despair. And I think every few months, I'll tell people, I'm like, every few months, I'll get in this mode where I'm like, what am I doing? Nothing I've done has made a bit of difference. Like, this is a waste of time, you know, even though, like, logically I know it's not. It is tough when you, especially like when something's so clear about how I've broken it down, and then it's like, somebody just takes something totally different away from that. You're like, how is that your take home from that?
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, and again, having gone to therapy for 8 years now and understanding that, oh, there's my filter on the world, and then there's your filter. And whatever happens in my brain, it then has to go to my mouth passes through my filter, goes to your filter, into your brain, and man, tell you what, that message can get quite convoluted.
Sure, and you have no control over that, nor do you have the kind of ability to change that, right? So it's like being okay. Like you can improve if you feel like, oh, I didn't communicate that clearly enough. You can make changes, but beyond that, like divorcing yourself from the expectation of how that's going to land with somebody else, I think is a healthier approach. But I would say, look, I think you are making a difference, and I think that can be calibrated by how I do see this shift in how the internet is operating, because it wasn't that long ago that somebody could go on a podcast or make a video and make an outrageous claim, and it would really go untested or unchallenged. And I feel like those days are over with. Like if you go and you say some crazy thing on a large show, somebody, if not you, is going to make a video about how you're wrong. And I think that's a healthy kind of, it's almost like a vaccine in the discourse around topics that are rife with misinformation. And I think that's a good thing. Like I think there is a higher standard of care.
I agree with that. I used to say I want to be the, I want to keep the charlatans awake at night going, oh, I don't want to wind up on what the heck, and, I love, for quite honestly, I mean, I've been doing kind of debunking stuff for a long time. And for a long time, I felt like I was the only one doing it. And I know that's probably not true, but it definitely felt that way at times. And now there's so many people.
Well, there's debunking the debunking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is good. Like, let's have the conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the truth will surface as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think, I love the people who are doing that kind of content. I've had some people like, does it bother you that people are like kind of ripping off? I'm like, not rip off. I'm like, please, I need help. I can't deal with all this stuff on my own, Please, like, I hope there's 10,000 people that go out and do this who have the capability to do it, right? And I think the other problem is that people have to be in the space of being willing to receive the information, right? There was actually a study done. I may butcher it again, but I'm going to try my best not to. But it was a study on politics, and they looked at both Republicans and Democrats, and they would give them information that either refuted a commonly held belief in their party or supported it. And with both Republicans and Democrats, there was no statistical difference. Both were equally bad at this. Information that supported their position obviously reinforced that position. But information that debunked it actually had the opposite effect. It actually made them entrench further.
Entrenched.
They actually doubled down. And so both the information that supported it or debunked it were equally as effective as just reinforcing them in their own beliefs. And so that's very, very difficult to overcome. And one of the things I'll tell people is, that's kind of why debates can really be a waste of time. I mean, I'll do them, but I'm not doing them thinking like if I'm debating somebody in the carnivore camp or something like that.
It's a great fallacy that debates are going to solve this kind of problem.
People end up, even the people who are independent, so to speak, they usually decide to whoever kind of is closest to their personal bias and who is
I want
basically
Blink.
the most likable, right? And who
I open
who
Blink
talks
first.
the most clearly and communicates.
Charge
And
just
so
finished.
that's really tough. And so, there was some people say, why didn't the scientists go on the program and debate? It's like, nobody knows where it's going to go. Probably not going to go to great. Great communicators. It's going to last. Right? So, yeah, it's very difficult. But I agree with you that the self-policing in an industry is very important. And, every once in a while, I'll hear people go, I wish the government would just step in and regulate the information. I'm like, okay, be careful.
Yeah.
because, the government is just made up of people like us, probably about the same level of intelligence and prone to the same biases as everyone else, and you're trusting that they're going to be able to effectively identify who the next person is. Yeah, that's not.
But do you think that the platforms have a responsibility when it comes to this?
I got 3 Colossus this game.
You're a libertarian, so
I'm an independent.
you're okay.
But I would say
You have a libertarian streak.
yes. I have a hard time saying any particular political party just because. Let me put it this way. I think Penn Jillette said it best, which was, whatever problem is trying to be addressed, I'll go up the furthest amount of freedom the problem could be addressed with, and that's kind of where I start. But even as saying fiscally conservative, socially liberal, there are things that libertarians say like, oh, please just shut up. So that's a tough one, the platforms, because on
I don't
one,
envy anybody who runs those platforms trying to untangle this knot.
I mean, when the pandemic hit, I said, I'm glad I'm not in charge. Because no matter what you do, it's going to be criticized and explained why it's wrong. As far as the platforms go, deplatforming people, at the end of the day, they're a business, right? They're a company. And so part of me goes, if I own a company, if I own a store and you walk in, part of me feels like I can go and say, I don't like the way you just look at me, please, right? Like, it's my company, my place. Other part of me goes, well, social media really isn't the same way anymore because it is so ubiquitous. It is almost like
Upgrade complete.
a human right now, I guess the way to put it. I don't know.
Or a public utility.
Right. So, great. That's a great example, actually. Let's take the gas and electric, right? It's not like you can go shop around and be like, oh, well, I'd really rather have this electric company, right? You're kind of really limited with your choices. And, okay, you can go, I don't like Instagram, I'm going somewhere else. Okay, good luck with that, And so...
you can. There are other options, but it's not the same thing.
Right, exactly. And so I think as much as I don't like the misinformation that's out there, I think it has to be pretty egregious for me to go, yeah, I think they should be deplatformed, right? Because it is a really slippery slope. What happens if the people who are doing the platforming, deplatforming, what values are they? Right?
Yeah, this is a whole, we could talk for hours. I think there's a difference between deplatforming and one enhancement where messages rise to the top and the more kind of extreme or counter narrative they are, that's what people like to engage with, and so that's what people are going to be seeing. And is this the way that we? Anyway, that's a whole thing, right? I don't have a solution to that.
All right, guys.
I'm gathering you don't either.
It's gonna be it for
brings me
now.
Back to this idea of
Thanks for watching.
identity that
Peace
you've
out.
spoken about, like the people who
Wait,
let's do
who
this.
really are able to
you want to finish this
navigate
podcast?
the crevasse.
I'm waiting for the reveal. You're gonna be waiting a long time, bro.